Protest going on behind us about pensions, but Douglas Carswell from UKIP and Tim Farron, leader of the Liberal Democrats, I hope we can all just about hear each other think. Douglas Carswell, you've said quite a few times, I think, that you hoped Philip Hammond would be more fiscally responsible than his predecessor. Do you think he is being now?
I'm a little worried that actually the amount of public debt is now heading back up again. I think the best that can be said for this budget is that it's very dull, it's unflashy, but it's not fundamentally sorting out the biggest problem we face, which is the accumulation of big amounts of public debt. And at the same time that public debt is going back up, he's managing to attack the self-employed and self-employed national insurance contributions. So I'm not happy about either of those two things.
Tim Farron, you were nodding through some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the obvious thing from this budget is that you cannot have well-funded health services, social care, education, or indeed to solve the problems that the WASPy women are rightly complaining about today with a hard Brexit. You choose to leave the single market and the customs union, which was not on the ballot paper, then there is a cost, and that cost is 100 billion extra borrowing and a 60 billion pound war chest to pay for the loss of trade and the income and tax receipts relating to a hard Brexit. It's right for us to point that out. We think today, if you look at the attack on business in particular, the little sticking plaster, if that, of the relief to those who are going to be hit by business rate increases is nothing at all. And if you look at what the impact of national insurance contribution rises will be on self-employed people, that is immense. Many people, I mean, something like 1 in 4 people working in my constituency in the South Lakes are self-employed. It'd be a huge blow to them. It seems to me we've got a government now who thinks they can take business for granted because they've got a dreadful opposition that doesn't keep them on their toes.
We'll come back to some of that, but that's part of the point, isn't it, Douglas Carswell? Philip Hammond has to be cautious because he has to retain that war chest. By definition, we don't know what's coming down the track.
It's not a case of Brexit. It's an uncertain world out there. At some point, the Japanese and the Italian bond market are going to go pop, and governments around the world will find that they can't borrow.
But it's another layer of uncertainty, isn't it?
But on the contrary, I think actually growth, if you look at the growth projections, they've gone up from 1.4% of GDP next year, increased to 2% growth. So actually,
yes, but then down
the forecast,
again for the 3 years after that.
It's actually pretty healthy growth. It's just south of 2% for the next 4 or 5 years. Now, given the OBR's success rate at forecasting these things, I'm not sure we can take anything beyond the next 18 months that seriously. But actually, in terms of growth projections, there's some pretty good news out there today. OK. Tim
Farron, can we find some positives? Because your party is very keen to see more investment in health and social care. There's quite a lot of money coming forward for social care. Do you think finally the government thinks this is an area that needs tackling?
Well, look, 2 billion sounded good until he said it was over 3 years. We need something like 4 billion for health and social care every year as a minimum. So, no, it's very poor, but it's a reminder of what limited room for manoeuvre he has got. And we are, as Douglas points out, at the mercy of the international money markets. One of the reasons is we've chosen to sever our ties to the world's biggest and most powerful market, which is the one just 20 miles away across the channel.
All the fault of people like you, Douglas Carswell.
I'd rather not fight the referendum, but I'm happy to. Actually, what this budget really tells us is that the really significant economic decisions are going to be taken in about 6 months' time. The whole deferring big decisions on the business rates, the fact that there's no substantive answer to the big question how we fund social care. I think, in a sense, this budget kicks things into touch to be deferred in 6 months' time.
And isn't that partly because we are now going to be heading into an autumn budget as well?
Well, it's great uncertainty as well. I mean, the point about growth is significant, and the growth that we have, which is modest, but it's there, is based almost entirely on consumer spending. And the great fear about that is, as inflation goes up, which is predicted, we've all of us seen petrol prices go up by something like 15% over the last 6 to 12 months. Those kind of things stop people spending money, and if your entire economy is based on consumer spending, you're in trouble, and that's why he needed to invest for the long term, and he's not done that.
Is there some better news much longer term if you look at some of the education announcements? T-levels, a lot of rhetoric about making Britain fighting fit for the future. I mean, a recognition that a vocational qualification is worthy and important is a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, massively important. I think to blur the lines between vocational and academic education is a long-sought goal that I share with the Chancellor. I think the problem that we have in all of this is that it's new gimmickry and new words and new slogans that don't mean much different from what we've had in the past, replacing qualifications that already have a good, if you like, brand recognition out there with employers, for instance. The real issue, though, if you want to improve education, is about money. And over the next 3 years, 3 billion will be lost from schools funding, and giving, what, a third of a billion to pet projects, grammar schools and free schools, whether you agree with them or not, it's a complete diversion of the real job, which is giving teachers the tools they need to teach our kids.
But isn't it actually about diversification, though? Aside from the grammar school issue, it's about saying STEM topics are very, very important. We need to get more and more children interested in those topics, perhaps particularly girls on International Women's Day, and to make Britain a modern, forward-looking country that competes with China and the rest. You've got to have those
So
topics.
vocational education is critically important, and those statements, or that intent within this budget statement, are things that we should welcome. I think some of the detail is worrying. I think the difficulty is, though, that where the money's going is after the pet projects. It's the kind of crazy things that some wonk in the DFE, who probably has never been to a state school, dreamt up at some point in the last 2 years, that every teacher now has to live with when they haven't got enough money to make sure their kids are properly taught.
Is it just a pet project, the approach to education?
In my constituency, the government managed to spend £16 million on a brand new school they closed after 3 years. So I think spending more money but spending it differently is very welcome. But, I would like to see free schools and perhaps grammar schools in my part of Essex too. We need to make sure that these reforms don't just improve education in some of the better off parts of London.
All right, Douglas Carswell, Tim Farron, thanks very much for joining us here. Thank you, and much more from outside.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.